Hi, it's Jeff Chalmers here from discoverdouble-bass.com, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's guest. He is a wonderful artist who's performed with numerous heavy hitters in the bluegrass country world. I'm sure that you know his playing with Alison, Krauss and Union Station. It's the great Barry Bales. Barry, thanks for joining me again today.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Well, it's been really cool hanging out with you this week. It's been a real education for me. Nashville is such a cool place, and bluegrass is such an awesome style, and I've been trying to kind of learn as much as I can in anticipation of this and really soak it in. But I was hoping that you could maybe highlight some of the key players, maybe who've influenced you, and some of the sounds and the things that drew to them, and then perhaps it would help people on their journey to learn more about bluegrass and specifically about the bass players.
Sure.
So
yeah, bluegrass is a lot better than it sounds. I've always said. I grew up in a bluegrass household. My dad played guitar and mandolin and had a great record collection of bluegrass and country records at the time. So I there was never really a line drawn between the two. So I had that much more great stuff that I got to listen to and am influenced heavily by both sides of that. Of course, as with a lot of young musicians, I was at first interested in all the new stuff, the hot stuff. It took me a while to really appreciate and go back and properly listen to the founding fathers and really dive into that kind of thing. Bill Monroe, Flatt and Scruggs, the Stanley Brothers, Reno and Smiley, all the first generation. And that's some of my favorite stuff. When I first started really playing bass, I was probably 14. I had kind of fooled around with some other things, but just always hooked by bluegrass music, just really hooked me. Grew up around it, being from East Tennessee, you're surrounded by it, always on the radio, always somebody playing somewhere. And so a lot of it came by osmosis, just being submerged and surrounded by it. But some of the records that really set me on fire when I was first starting to get into playing was one guy in particular was Roy Huskey Jr., who his dad was a member of the Nashville A-team and a famous Nashville session bass player, but Roy seemed to play on a lot of the bluegrass records that I really loved that were coming out at that time.
how would you describe his sound? Like, what was it about Roy's playing that kind of, that you could maybe point to? Is there something specific?
Roy played a gut string setup,
okay,
like what we talked about, and Roy was a total character. Roy heard in color. And I know there's a term for that, and I can't think of what that is.
Synesthesia or something?
Yeah,
yeah.
But that just was the icing on the cake. If you ever met Roy and then somebody said that, you'd go, well, of course he does. But he played a gut string setup, and he had such a great pull. All of his notes, even if he was on the G string, every note sounded like the string was that big around. And there's a famous story about somebody getting with him and doing this test, holding a match out in front of his F hole and him blowing it out, and they kept moving back and back and back and kept going out. But Roy, he came from a very traditional, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense because I'm the same way, from a self-taught, unschooled standpoint, but yet the things that he came up with, the bass lines that he played, and the counterpoint passing notes and alternating things were just so cool and so great. And he would play stuff like, there's a song, he played bass on Alison's first record, her solo record, Too Late to Cry. And there's a song in there that's on in E, and it's called Foolish Heart, but the chord progression is 1, 3, 4, 1. But he would play a descending start on the E, over the top of that. But just the fact that he could play that high E, if I played that, it would sound so silly and wimpy. But he played it, and it still sounded huge and believable, and you listen to it and go, oh, that's an awesome choice. Whereas anybody else would be like, what are you doing?
Yeah, you'd lose the grounding. But with this, you've got this thickness and this authority. You talk a lot about authority in your course, actually, Barry, and I hear that in your playing. Okay, so who would you... When I think about a really rock solid two feel, I'm thinking about you because I've been listening to your bass playing all week. And honestly, in fact, actually, when I spoke to Jeff, the guitar player, I was talking about working with you, and he said, Barry, he is like a rock.
Oh, wow.
And I was, and that's that. But what about in your mind? Who are the bass players that inspired you to play that way? Maybe some of the.
Well, from a a real steady, trying to put it in there where it's supposed to be. Bluegrass kind of place is a lot of that came just from the overall influences that I'd had, not necessarily one in particular I could put my finger on, but just as I talk about in our lessons, listening to everything and learning the foundations of the music and hearing everything and how it's supposed to be played. On top of that, Roy Jr. was a huge influence. There's a guy that he was the first guitar player Ralph Stanley had after Ralph's brother Carter died. His name's Larry Sparks, really soulful mountain singer. There was his son, Larry D. Sparks, had just got in the band and was playing bass for him when I first started traveling, and we would see each other at shows a lot. And D was a big influence because he's really got a real great solid pull, and there's nothing like seeing. You can say this about any kind of music, but bluegrass especially. There's nothing like experiencing it live, and that sometimes it doesn't translate so well to record. But being able to stand in front of the stage or on the side of the stage. And his dad will just raise hairs on your arm. His singing is so great. And so to see that whole combination in a live setting, he was a big influence on my playing. Another guy that I really did and continue to look up to, who's not very much older than I am, but his name's Todd Phillips, who I became aware of Todd when I first became aware of Tony Rice. My dad was strictly first generation. We had Bill Monroe records, we had Osborne Brothers records, and Tony was a well-established superstar in bluegrass before I ever heard of him, because he was a different generation, and my dad was not so much into that. But in starting to go back around and learn about him, I became acquainted with Todd's playing. Todd came from a different angle. He didn't come from a bluegrass background. He came from a jazz background. And Tony and Todd met in David Grisman's acoustic quintet that was playing on acoustic instruments, was playing original jazz, basically. They all met up and were trying to break new ground in the Bay Area and just playing some really great stuff. And it was all those different influences. Tony having come just straight from J.D. Crow's comparatively really traditional bluegrass band into that setting, and Todd's influences. Fast forward, when Tony left that band and kind of more became a solo act and started putting out lots of groundbreaking, monumental records, Todd was always with him playing bass. Todd had a much more sustainy, what I would call a jazz-based kind of sound. Played a lot of octaves, played a lot of just effortless, really buttery touch. I really got a lot from Todd, particularly on the left hand, about ways that you can play bluegrass and add things into it, staying true to it, but add things into it other than that's what it's about. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but coming from the outside, quote unquote, Todd just always had a lot of really great ideas.
Is there anyone that jumps out at you when you think about somebody playing these kind of cool runs and lead-ups, walk-ups between kind of chords? Is there a bass player that jumps out in that sense?
Well, everybody's, even within bluegrass, that being the Route 5 kind of being the thing that everybody goes off of, there are so many different styles, and I've taken some from so many different people. one guy in particular that I love his playing, and I love the things that he comes up with. It's not my style, and I don't play that way at all, but Tom Gray, who played with the Country Gentlemen in the 50s and went on to have a very long, storied career with the Seldom Seen, he came up playing with the Gentlemen in a 4-piece band. The other 3 guys in the band were always singing, and so they gave him free range. So his hero was George Shuffler, who played with the Stanley Brothers, who was famous for playing a real walking, a pretty busy walking bass style. Tom took that and went on with it, and there again, it's a more traditional approach, but still, like Todd, always coming up with a lot of really cool ideas.
That's fantastic. I mean, there were so many players that we could talk about. We were just chatting about Bob Moore outside and all of these wonderful players in the bluegrass world. So it's been great to get a bit of a taste about a few of the specific inspirations that are behind your playing. And I thought maybe you might like to share. You've played on a lot of records, and you've been nominated for. In fact, you've been nominated 18 times for a Grammy, and you've got 15 Grammy awards. Is this right? Congratulations,
correct, yes.
Man! That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible, really. The library of work that you have. So, is there a specific record, perhaps one with Alison, I'm not sure, that you could point to that you feel is a good representation of your work? Like, if you were going to give me a CD to go and check out of your bass playing in a nice band context that I'd enjoy on the drive home, what would it be?
Wow. I'm not much of a self-promoter. I would say that maybe for a number of reasons, I started to mention the first record that I played on when I joined the band, simply because I have such fond memories of, we were all kids, felt like we were kind of creating something new and learning as we went, which was an album called Every Time You Say Goodbye. But then part of me thinks, well, something later to hopefully show that I may have matured a little bit. Probably the best representation would be, we did a double live album some years ago at the Louisville Palace Theater, and it's just called Live. The material spans from early days to current stuff. It's got bluegrass on it. It's got full band stuff with drums, and for what we have recorded, I think that's maybe the best overall representation.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if you want to learn more about bluegrass bass, Barry has been presenting a course for Discoverable Bass, really covering a wide range of areas within the subject. So please go and check out. We'll provide some links below. So we're going to cut to a quick sample of Barry playing in the trio, so you can hear more of how things sound in context. We'll just have a little snippet to finish off with. So thanks so much for watching at home. And of course, Barry, thank you for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure learning about this incredible world of bluegrass bass.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jeff.
No problem.